I did not knock twice. I did not plead. I stood on that porch for exactly 4 seconds, looked my son in the eye, and turned around. That was the moment he made the worst business decision of his life. He just didn't know it yet. My name is Eugene Wallace. I am 67 years old, and for the better part of 4 decades, I have worn the same steel-toed boots, driven the same dented Chevy pickup, and let the world assume exactly what it wanted to assume about a gray-haired black man with grease under his fingernails. People see what they expect to see. I learned that lesson early, and I spent a lifetime turning it into an advantage. It was Thanksgiving morning when my son called. Not to wish me well, not to ask if I needed a ride. He called to uninvite me. His voice had that careful, measured tone I had been hearing more and more since he married into the Holt family 2 years prior, a tone that sounded like every word had been rehearsed in a mirror. "Dad," he said, "Brittany's parents flew in from Connecticut last night. Gerald just closed a major deal and they want to celebrate. And this is really more of a business dinner than a family thing. I think it is better if we keep it small. You understand." I understood perfectly. I had driven 40 minutes to his house anyway. Not out of stubbornness, because I wanted to look him in the face when he said it in person. He answered the door in a charcoal blazer I had never seen before. Behind him, I could see the dining room table set with candles and the kind of stemware that costs more than a week of groceries. His wife Brittany appeared at his shoulder a moment later, smooth and polished in a cream dress. Her blonde hair pinned up like she was attending a board meeting. She saw me on the step and offered a smile so thin it could have slid under a closed door. "Oh," she said brightly. "Eugene, we weren't expecting you." I told my son I just wanted to drop something off. I held up the sweet potato pie I had spent 3 hours making that morning, the same recipe my late wife Dorothy had made every November for 31 years. He took it without looking at it. Then he said the thing. He stepped outside and pulled the door almost shut behind him, the way a man does when he wants the people inside to keep talking and the person outside to feel the cold. He said, "Dad, I need you to understand something. Gerald Holt has connections that could change everything for me. He is talking about bringing me on as a partner in his development group. This is my shot, and I need tonight to go perfectly." He paused. "The way you present yourself, the truck, the clothes, it sends a message, and right now I cannot afford that message." I looked at my son, the boy I had walked to his first day of school, the boy I had driven to every soccer practice for 6 years in that same truck he was now embarrassed by. I looked at him and I waited to feel anger, but what I felt instead was something quieter and far more useful. Clarity. I nodded once. I told him to enjoy his dinner. I walked back down the front steps, got into my truck, and drove away. 3 minutes down the road, I pulled into a gas station and sat in the parking lot. I was not crying. I was thinking. I opened my contacts and found a name near the top. Calvin Dupree. Cal and I had served together in the same engineer battalion 50 years ago. He was now the most decorated trial attorney in the state of Georgia, a man who had once made a federal judge apologize on the record. He picked up on the second ring. "Eugene," Cal said. "Happy Thanksgiving. You calling to complain about the Cowboys again?" "Not today," I told him. "I need you to activate the contingency." A brief silence. Then, "Marcus triggered the clause?" "He didn't know he did," I said. "But yes, the property at Sycamore Ridge, the lease arrangement, the company accounts, all of it. Same protocol we drafted after the wedding." "Eugene," Cal's voice dropped half a register. "You sure? This is the point of no return." I looked out the windshield at the empty road. My son had just told me I was a liability because I drove a truck and looked like a working man. He had taken 43 years of my labor and translated it into an embarrassment. "I am sure," I said. "Start the clock." I heard Cal exhale. "Give me 2 hours." I drove back to my house on the east side of Atlanta, a modest brick rancher in a neighborhood where the mailboxes leaned and the driveways cracked in the summer heat. Marcus used to bring his college friends here and quietly apologize for the square footage. He called it my starter house, as if a man my age was still waiting to arrive somewhere. He had no idea I had arrived decades ago. I walked into my home office, which was the one room in the house that would have surprised anyone who assumed they knew me. 3 monitors, a high-back leather chair, a wall of filing cabinets, and a secure server rack that hummed like a sleeping machine. I sat down and opened the corporate dashboard for EWB Holdings. EWB. Eugene and Dorothy Wallace Builders. I had founded the company 38 years ago with a $4,000 loan and a second-hand backhoe. Dorothy had done the books at our kitchen table, while Marcus slept in the next room. We had started by grading lots for other developers, then got our own municipal contracts, then quietly began acquiring the land itself. By the time Dorothy passed, 6 years ago, we had built something neither of us had ever said out loud, because saying it felt dangerous. EWB Holdings owned 11 commercial properties across Georgia, 2 in Tennessee, and held maintenance contracts with 4 municipal water districts. The gross asset value, as of last quarter, was just over $48 million. My son thought I fixed plumbing on the weekends for extra money. He had never asked the right question. I pulled up the sub-account labeled Sycamore Ridge Family Lease. Marcus believed he was renting his 4-bedroom home in Brookhaven from a real estate investment trust that his former college roommate had connected him with at a networking event. He bragged that he had negotiated a sweetheart rate of $200 a month because of his relationship with the principals. He had no idea the principals was a word that meant me. I looked at the lease termination clause Cal and I had written 2 years ago, the weekend after the wedding rehearsal dinner when Gerald Holt had looked at me across the table and asked, with genuine curiosity, what I actually did for work. When I told him I was in property and infrastructure, he had laughed politely and turned back to his son-in-law. I had excused myself, called Cal from the parking lot, and told him to add a conduct clause to every instrument tied to Marcus. The clause was simple. If the primary beneficiary demonstrated conduct materially detrimental to the grantor, which Cal and I had defined very specifically as exclusion, public humiliation, or misrepresentation, every arrangement dissolved simultaneously and immediately upon the grantor's invocation. I invoked it at 2:14 inches the afternoon on Thanksgiving Day. I hit enter and watched the cascade begin in real time. The family lease at Sycamore Ridge terminated. The vehicle registration for the Audi Q7 that Marcus drove was transferred back to EWB Fleet Management. The supplementary corporate card that Marcus carried in his wallet, the one he told Brittany's parents, was a perk from his consulting practice flagged as suspended. And the line of credit I had maintained as a silent backstop for his boutique communications firm went dark. I sat back in my chair. I was not smiling. I was watching the dominoes. 2 hours later, my phone rang. It was not Marcus. It was Cal. "Eugene," he said. "The repo team just called. Your son came outside during dinner to find the Audi on a flatbed. He told them it was a mistake. They showed him the papers. How did he react?" Cal paused, like a man who just realized the floor was glass. I told Cal to proceed with phase 2 and hung up. The next morning, Marcus was at my door before 8 o'clock. He did not knock gently. He pounded with both fists, and when I opened the door, he pushed past me into the hallway without being invited. His Thanksgiving blazer was gone, replaced by a wrinkled sweatshirt. His jaw was tight. He looked like a man who had not slept. "Fix it," he said. "Whatever you did, fix it. The car is gone." The card was declined in front of Gerald, in front of everyone. Do you have any idea how that looked? I stood in the hallway with my hands in my pockets and watched him. "That was our card, Dad. My business card. It just stopped working in the middle of dinner. Pierre had to cover it. Gerald Holt had to cover my own Thanksgiving dinner. And Brittany spent the whole night crying in the bathroom." I said, "Marcus, who is Pierre?" "Brittany's father. His middle name. He goes by Pierre with close friends." I nodded slowly. "The man who told you to uninvite your father." He covered the check. Marcus stopped pacing. He looked at me. He started to say something careful, the way people do when they realize mid-sentence that they are building their argument on sand. "That was a business decision, Dad. That had nothing to do with." I cut him off. I told him to sit down. He didn't. I told him again, and something in my voice must have landed differently than usual, because he sat. I walked to my desk and opened the top drawer. I took out a folder and set it on the coffee table in front of him. He looked at it but did not reach for it. I said, "That folder contains the lease agreement for the house on Sycamore Ridge, the vehicle loan documentation for your Audi, the charter for your communications firm, and the last 4 years of account statements for the line of credit that funded it." He stared at the folder. Then he looked up at me. "Open it," I said. He opened it slowly. The way people open things they suspect will hurt them. He looked at the first page, and I watched his face work through it. The lessor on the lease was EWB Holdings. He looked at me. He went back to the folder. The vehicle loan carrier was EWB Fleet Management LLC. He flipped to the credit facility. The backing institution was EWB Capital Group. His voice came out strange and flat. He said, "What is EWB?" "Eugene and Dorothy Wallace," I said. "Builders." He put the papers down. His hands were not steady. I told him then, calmly and without drama, what I had built. Not the number. Not yet. Just the shape of it. The properties, the contracts, the years. I told him about the backhoe and the $4,000 loan. I told him about his mother doing books at the kitchen table. I told him that the truck he was ashamed of had driven to job sites that generated the down payment on his college education, his first apartment, the security deposit on his communications firm's office space. Everything he had pointed away from came from the same hands he had asked me to hide. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Dad, I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said. "You never asked." He looked at the folder again. Then he looked up with something new in his eyes, something I recognized because I had seen it in the mirror after my first major contract fell through 30 years ago. Calculation. He was doing the math. He was recalibrating. He said, "Okay, I hear you. I should have handled yesterday differently. I should not have asked you to stay away. But Dad, if you own all of this, if EWB is really yours, then we have an opportunity here. Gerald Holt has been looking for a development partner for 2 years. If I bring you in—" "Stop," I said. He stopped. "You are not listening to me, Marcus. You are not hearing what I said. You are already figuring out how to leverage the information. That is the problem. That has always been the problem." He opened his mouth. I held up my hand. I told him that the accounts would remain frozen. I told him that the lease would proceed to termination and that he would receive formal notice from Cal's office within 48 hours. I told him that the car would not be returned and that the line of credit was closed. He stood up so fast the folder slid off the table. He said I was being vindictive. He said I was punishing him for one dinner. He said I had deliberately kept him in the dark about the money, and that was manipulative, and that I couldn't suddenly pull a rug out from under him that he never knew existed. I said, "Marcus, you told me I didn't fit the image you were building. I am simply agreeing with you. I don't fit into your image, and your image does not fit into mine." He slammed the door on his way out. It shook the windows. The week that followed was turbulent in the way that a controlled demolition is turbulent. Everything falls exactly where it is supposed to, but it is still loud and it is still irreversible. Cal called me on day 3. He told me that Marcus had gone to an attorney. The attorney had sent a demand letter claiming that the termination of the lease and seizure of the vehicle constituted unlawful eviction and property theft. Cal had responded the same afternoon with the original lease instrument, the signed conduct addendum, and a 17-page brief that, in Cal's words, made the opposing counsel go very quiet on the phone. On day 5, Brittany posted a video online. I was told about it by a woman named Sandra, who had been Dorothy's closest friend and had appointed herself my informal intelligence network. Sandra called me at 7 in the morning and told me I needed to see what my daughter-in-law had put on the internet. I watched it on my tablet at the kitchen table with my coffee. Brittany sat in what appeared to be a hotel room, her eyes done up to look raw and tired, speaking in a whisper, calibrated for maximum sympathy. She described me as a controlling patriarch who had spent years financially manipulating my son. She said I had appeared at Thanksgiving uninvited and become aggressive when asked to leave. She said I had retaliated by taking their car and their home because I could not accept that my son had built a successful independent life. She cried at the right moments. She tagged 3 local news accounts. I turned off the tablet. I finished my coffee. Then I called Ray Colburn. Ray was a former Fulton County investigator who had retired early and now worked privately. He was methodical, discreet, and had the particular gift of finding the thing that people were most certain no one would find. I had used him twice before in business matters. I told Ray I needed everything there was to know about Gerald and Patricia Holt of Greenwich, Connecticut. Not the version they presented, the actual version. Ray called me back in 36 hours. He drove to my house, sat at my kitchen table, and placed a manila envelope between us. He did not open it. He just looked at me and said, "Eugene, your son didn't marry up. He married sideways and slightly down." I opened the envelope. Gerald Holt was not a developer. He was a deal facilitator, the kind of man who inserted himself into other people's transactions and collected referral fees he described as consulting income. His company, Holt Capital Partners, had never originated a development deal of its own. It had never held a property. It operated out of a WeWork office and a very expensive website. The last 3 fiscal years showed revenue of less than $120,000 combined, against personal expenses that ran north of $400,000 annually. Patricia Holt had a lifestyle brand on social media with 40,000 followers. She posted about interior design and travel. She had not disclosed that the interiors she photographed were rental properties and hotel suites, or that the travel was funded by the same line of credit currently carrying a balance of over $200,000. They owned nothing. They owed everyone, and they had flown to Atlanta for Thanksgiving because Marcus, funded invisibly by me, had looked, to them, like the most promising exit ramp from a life they had been performing for years. I set the papers down. I thought about the sweet potato pie sitting on a table I was not invited to sit at. I thought about my son watching those people and believing they were what success looked like. I told Ray to hold the file. I was not going to use it yet. The eviction notice was served to Marcus and Brittany on the 7th day. 30 days to vacate or pay fair market rent of $6,400 monthly, plus utilities, plus the HOA assessment I had been covering as a courtesy. Brittany had apparently screamed at the process server. Marcus had called Cal's office 9 times in 4 hours. He came back to my house that evening. This time he did not pound. He rang the bell once and stood on the step looking smaller than I had ever seen him. He was wearing jeans, no blazer. He asked if he could come in. We sat in the living room. He sat on Dorothy's sofa and looked around the room the way people do when they are trying to see something they looked past 100 times before. He said, "Dad, I need to tell you something about Gerald." I waited. He said that Gerald had approached him 2 weeks after the wedding with a proposition. He had told Marcus that he had investors lined up for a mixed-use development in Buckhead, and that he needed a local partner with construction knowledge and credibility. Marcus had told Gerald that he had connections in the Atlanta development community. What Marcus had actually told Gerald, over the following months, as he fished for anything that would let him deliver on that promise, was a version of EWB Holdings that cast Marcus himself as the emerging principal of a family real estate enterprise. Gerald thought Marcus was the one with the money. My son had borrowed my identity to impress a man who had nothing to lend. I looked at him sitting on his mother's sofa with his hands between his knees, and I felt something I had been trying not to feel all week. Not anger. Grief. I said, "Marcus, why didn't you just ask me?" He looked at the floor. He said he didn't think I would take it seriously. He said Gerald and Patricia had a way of talking about old money and real operators that made him feel like everything he came from was too rough around the edges. He said Brittany had told him, more than once, that her parents would invest in a man who carried himself with confidence. And confidence, she meant not looking like you needed anyone's help. He said he thought if he could put together one real deal, just one, he could stop needing to borrow my credibility and start building his own. I said, "Son, you had access to the most valuable mentorship in real estate development in this city, and you chose to perform around it instead of learn from it." He nodded. His eyes were wet. I told him I was not reinstating anything yet. I told him he needed to understand the difference between the two. I called Cal. 3 days later, I did something that Brittany, her parents, and 3 of their mutual acquaintances found out about publicly because Cal had filed the document in the county record, and records are public. I had rewritten my estate plan, not in Marcus's favor. I had restructured EWB Holdings as a charitable operating foundation with a 12-person board of directors and had committed 60% of net assets, just under $30 million, to a workforce development endowment called the Dorothy Wallace Trades Initiative. The endowment would fund paid apprenticeships in construction, plumbing, electrical, and civil infrastructure for young men and women from underserved Atlanta neighborhoods. Kids who looked like where I came from. The remaining 40% stayed in the operating company for another decade, after which it too would roll into the endowment. Marcus was listed as a potential advisory board member, contingent on demonstrated professional conduct and a completed curriculum in real estate law. Not an inheritance. An application. Cal had issued a press release. The Atlanta Business Chronicle ran a short item. A larger outlet picked it up. The headline read, "Quietly held Atlanta developer commits $30M to Trades Workforce Initiative." That was the day Brittany's father called my cell phone for the first time. He did not identify himself as Pierre. He said, "Mr. Wallace, my name is Gerald Holt." He said he believed there had been a misunderstanding. He said he had enormous respect for what I had built, and that he and I should sit down because there was a development opportunity in Buckhead that was genuinely compelling, and he believed my operational experience and his investor network could be tremendously complementary. I listened to him for 90 seconds. Then I said, "Gerald, I have reviewed your company's operating history. I know your current debt position. I know the balance on the line of credit you flew here on. I know you have not closed a development deal in your name in 11 years. I am not a mark. I am not a mentor. And I am not a conversation." I hung up. He called back twice. I did not answer. 2 days after the Chronicle piece ran, Brittany left. She had booked a flight back to Connecticut. She told Marcus, according to what Marcus told me later, that she had not signed up for a man whose father gave his money to strangers. She said she needed someone who understood how wealth worked. She took 3 suitcases and the coffee maker. Marcus called me from an empty house. I drove over, not because he asked me to, because he was my son and the house was empty, and he was sitting on the kitchen floor because all the furniture was leased through a company that had already sent a retrieval notice. I sat down on the floor beside him. 2 men on a kitchen floor in a house that was no longer his. He said, "Dad, I'm sorry. I said it wrong at Thanksgiving. I said it wrong for 2 years. I kept trying to be something that would make those people respect me, and I didn't see that you were already everything I was pretending to be." I looked at my son on that cold tile floor. I looked at him the way I had looked at him when he was 7 years old and had broken a neighbor's window with a baseball and tried to hide it from me. I had told him then that the hiding was always worse than the thing itself. I told him now that I wasn't ready to hand him anything yet. I told him that the endowment was real and the commitment was permanent, and he needed to understand that I had built something and I was not going to watch it fund someone else's performance. But I also told him that advisory board seat was a real offer, that if he wanted to learn the actual work, not the appearance of the work, I would teach him. Not because he was my son, because he had potential that he had been misdirecting for years. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. He asked if I had any food at my house. I told him I had sweet potato pie. He made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a cry. He said he had thrown away the pie I brought on Thanksgiving because Brittany said it didn't go with the menu she had planned. I said, "That was a mistake." He said, "Yeah." We drove back to my house in my truck. He didn't say anything about the truck. He looked out the window at the city his mother and I had driven through 1,000 times, bringing him home from school, from practice, from the hospital when he broke his wrist at 14. The city that EWB Holdings had helped maintain, pipe by pipe and contract by contract, for 4 decades. The city he had spent 2 years trying to impress from the outside instead of understanding from within. I heated up the pie. We sat at the same table where Dorothy used to do the books, and we ate without talking. And outside the kitchen window, the November dark came down over Atlanta, the way it always does, slow and without fanfare, the way all serious things arrive. Before he left that night, Marcus stood in the front hall and said, "Dad, how long have you known about Gerald? How long did you know he was broke?" I told him I had suspected since the rehearsal dinner. He looked stunned. "You let me spend 2 years trying to impress a man who had nothing?" I said, "You weren't trying to impress him for me. You were trying to impress him for you. I couldn't do that work for you. Some lessons cost something before they mean anything." He stood there for a moment. Then he said, "What do I do now?" I said, "Monday morning, 7 a.m. You come to the EWB job site on the West Side corridor. Wear clothes you don't mind ruining. I will have Calvin add you to the Foundation's advisory roster as an associate. You will observe for 60 days. After that, we will talk." He said, "Observe what?" I said, "How things actually get built." He nodded slowly. He put on his coat. He went out the door, and I watched him from the window walk to the rideshare car he had summoned on his phone because he no longer had a car of his own. He looked young. He looked like he was starting something rather than maintaining something, and there is a large difference between those two things. I turned off the kitchen light. I stood in the quiet of my house with Dorothy's recipe box on the counter and the sound of November settling into the walls. I had not won anything tonight. That was not the right word for it. I had survived something. I had kept something intact that needed to stay intact, not for my sake but for his. And I had given away $30 million to a city full of children who would never know my name but might one day, without realizing it, stand on something I helped build. I went to my desk. I opened my drawer and took out the yellow legal pad where I still wrote things by hand the way Dorothy had taught me. I wrote Monday, 7 a.m. West Side Corridor. Bring Marcus. Then I put the pad away and went to bed. The work would be there in the morning. It always was. That was the one thing in my life that had never failed me, never embarrassed me, never tried to leverage me for a deal I hadn't agreed to. The work was always exactly what it was. You showed up, you put in the hours, and at the end, you had something real, something that stood. I had built my whole life on that principle. And now, slowly, painfully, one stripped lease and one empty kitchen floor at a time, I was going to give my son the chance to learn it too. Not because he deserved it, because Dorothy would have wanted me to. And because some mornings, when I drive that old truck to the job site before the sun is fully up, I can still hear her at the kitchen table, pencil moving, numbers adding up, saying the same thing she always said when I asked if we were going to be okay. "Eugene," she would say, "we are not just going to be okay. We are building something." She was right. We were. We still are.